Before we start, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. Only 2% are subscribed. At 1,000 subscribers, I'll be posting a special video. The alarm screamed while Grease hissed and jumped. I'm Mara, 33, and the handle burned my palm. He thrust the skillet toward me and flinched away. Our kid started wailing from the hall, sharp and scared. Turn it off, I jerked the knob hard and low. He lifted his phone and filmed the smoke without helping. Total disaster. I tried, his grin twitched and vanished. I grabbed a lid and starved the flame, heartbeat punching. Get water for him, I pointed toward the hall. He hovered at the doorway and called, voice thin. It's too loud, he won't come to me, he shrugged. I scooped our kid and pressed his forehead, heat blooming. Back in the kitchen, the middle spat and spat. He leaned on the counter and watched my hands work. You're better at this, he offered a helpless smile. My jaw locked because I knew the rhythm already. Order dinner, I shoved my wallet into his hands. He pecked at the screen and frowned with theatrical confusion. What's our password? Is it the old one? Eyes blinking. I wiped the stovetop and counted the seconds, pulse steady. Check the fridge code, he held the phone out. There is no code there, I reached for the towel. Oh right, I forgot again, he laughed and stretched. The alarm still wailed and our kid clung tighter, trembling. I hit the test button and the noise died. He exhaled like he had lifted a car alone. Crisis handled, he tossed the phone back to me. My hand closed around it, colder than my voice. A bank alert flashed on the screen, payment due now. He glanced and whistled, then returned to his performance shrug. Numbers scare me, you have the system, he stepped back. I braced the phone on the counter and paid, teeth grinding. Trash out, I nudged the bin with my foot. He lifted the bag and let it slip on purpose. Oops, weak wrists, you've got better grip, he grinned. Something inside me shifted, small and decisive like a click. Bath the kid, I handed him the thermometer. He turned it upside down and squinted at the display. Is this Fahrenheit or magic? A laugh stalled at his lips. I checked it myself and measured the dose, hands sure. He stood near the doorway and offered commentary instead. Look at you, my competent queen, a shallow bow followed. The word queen landed like a paper crown, torn quickly. I heard myself breathe and realized the room felt smaller. Dinner arrived because I ordered it under his name. He opened the door and raised his voice for the hallway. Saved by delivery, his laugh chased the boxes inside. I set one aside for tomorrow, a plan forming. He slid the burnt skillet into the sink and sighed. I'm hopeless, you know this by now, eyes big and pleading. I watched him test the same excuse again and again. A thought surfaced and stayed, sharp as a drawn line. He reached for me like a medal he had earned. We make a great team, fingers drummed on the counter. My kid leaned into my hip and mirrored my silence. I touched his hair and pictured a different map soon. He raised the phone for one last heroic selfie. Disaster night, we survived, his caption started to form. I saw his smile and the ruin behind it. I smiled back and chose not to warn him, yet. The lights flickered once, then my phone buzzed with a cutoff notice. Did you switch the auto pay back on? I held the screen up. He rubbed his temple and squinted like the letters moved. I tried this morning, his thumb hovered and missed the point entirely. 3 steps, I opened a blank sheet and typed them slowly. Log in, choose account, confirm, I slid the laptop across. He pecked at keys and breathed loud while nothing happened. Strange sight, he muttered as the page asked the obvious again. Show me the confirmation, I kept my tone even and flat. He tilted the screen and a help article filled the view. Must be a new layout, he smiled without conviction or proof. I refreshed the account and saw a red banner waiting. One task, call the clinic for his checkup today. I handed him the number and watched the seconds matter. He tapped once and stared at the wall like it rang forever. I listened for a dial tone that never came from anywhere. They're closed, he dropped the phone onto the couch with flair. I pressed redial and a voice answered on the first ring. Appointments open at noon, I booked the slot and marked it. He grimaced and reached for a joke that did not land. My work meeting launched and faces flickered across tiny squares. He wandered behind me and asked where the laundry pods live. Same place as last time, I kept my voice near a whisper. He clattered through drawers until someone on my call coughed pointedly. Back in 5, I killed the mic and stepped into the hallway. He held a shirt under running water and looked pleased. Fixed it, he squeezed it once and dripped across the floor. I passed a towel and wiped a narrow path for later. Budget time after lunch, I opened a new tab. And kept breathing. He rolled his shoulders and pulled a chair like a spectator. We can do it together, he offered with bright support. He yawned when cells loaded and asked for the password again. Read the labels on each line, I kept it basic and quick. He clicked on categories and changed numbers at random. Round up, it feels safer, he announced with earnest concern. The totals doubled and my pulse answered with quiet thunder. An email pinged from his boss and requested tonight's deck. He glanced at the subject and shrugged with teenage bravado. "You're better with slides," floated across the table like nothing. I closed my eyes and pictured the edge I would cross. "Your project, your delivery," I pushed the laptop back his way. He scrolled to a blank slide and typed a lonely title. "Wanna just talk it out?" He leaned on my chair. I slid away and pointed to the clock ticking near noon. He opened a tutorial and increased the speed for drama. "Look at this trick," he whispered while the video raced. I watched him nod, then answer a message with a meme. The deadline tightened and I counted down in my head. The clinic time approached and our son tugged at my sleeve. Shoes on, I grabbed the health card and checked the bag. He patted his pockets and announced that the car keys vanished. I found them on the counter where he had staged the hunt. At the door he brightened and tried a tender bow. "Teamwork," he offered like a prize ribbon we both deserved. I locked eyes and let the silence stand between us. He blinked first and called from behind that he'd tidy. We hustled to the clinic and signed in without drama. I jotted questions and listened for what I already knew. On the way home, the phone chimed with another late fee. My grip tightened around the wheel and the shape of tomorrow. Back inside, he showcased a trash bag tied with flair. "Look at me," he laughed before the bottom split open. I watched peels slide across the tile in slow defeat. He stepped back and applauded my quick reach for the broom. "New plan starts now," I placed the broom against the wall. "Your list 4 items, no coaching," I said and waited. He scanned the paper and tried a smile that never formed. "By dinner," I added as the air between us sharpened. He folded the list and tucked it into his pocket. "Of course," he answered while already drifting toward the game console. My chest cooled as a decision settled like weather. By nightfall, I would measure effort without excuses and move. The doorbell rang early and he tossed me the oven mitt. "Stall them," he whispered while rifling through untouched pans. I opened with a steady smile that felt brittle. Behind me, nothing sizzled yet and time sprinted. He had sworn dinner was handled before 6. I checked the stovetop and found it cool and waiting. "Which knob starts the big burner?" floated from behind my shoulder. I watched the timer on my watch blink without mercy. 2 daycare parents stepped in with easy chatter and jokes. He appeared with a flourish and an empty platter. "Chef is a work in progress," he announced with a bow. Laughter covered the silence, but my jaw stayed still. "Pickup was delayed," he waved his phone like proof. "Call them for me," he nudged it into my palm. I set it down and angled my body between guests. "You placed it, you fix it," the air tightened. He opened the freezer and slammed it twice for drama. "Emergency plan," he held up frostbitten mystery and grinned. Microwave hummed and popped like a warning I had expected. Our kid reached toward the counter edge and slipped slightly. I caught the little hand and anchored him close. "Snacks now, simple," I pointed to crackers and safe fruit. He blinked like I had delivered calculus on a napkin. The bell rang again and footsteps multiplied in the hall. He launched into a bit about being domestically cursed. "Good thing she's the organized one," he clapped once too loud. Eyes turned to me while I checked the clock again. I felt a small click inside and logged it. A mom asked about potential allergens with quiet urgency. He froze and then gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. "It's fine, I think," his hands hovered without landing. My stomach dropped because uncertainty is not neutral with children. I found the sauce and read the label out loud. "Nuts here," I pulled it aside and swapped it fast. He whistled like it was a magic trick worth applause. I wrote a clear note and placed it where eyes landed. Guests chatted and pretended the near miss did not throb. He sidled up with 2 cups and a lopsided smile. Crisis averted by my brilliant partner, he announced to the room. I watched him stack credit on a tower he never built. Toast time, he tapped a spoon against his glass nervously. I'll cry if I speak, he joked and aimed at me. I met his eyes and did not rise from my chair. He stumbled through 3 sentences and lost his ending line. Plates finally circled with uneven portions and scattered sides. He leaned in and asked if I could plate faster. I lifted one eyebrow and returned to the conversation beside me. He sighed loud enough to earn sympathetic glances he pocketed. When the last family left, he exhaled like a marathon winner. See, we pulled it off, he tossed me a tired grin. I lifted the list from earlier and held it between us. Only the trash was done, and even that leaked. 4 tasks, 0 coaching, I tapped the paper slowly once. He stuffed his hands in his pockets and studied the floor. I'll start tomorrow, came soft like a bedtime story for himself. I nodded and set my alarm for before dawn on purpose. I left the lunchbox on the counter and walked past it. He breezed in and checked sports scores with a lazy grin. Our kid tugged his sleeve and pointed at the empty bag. I rinsed my coffee mug and said nothing on purpose. Lunch, the little voice rose like a siren in a small room. He patted pockets and scanned shelves like clues might appear. We're running late, I tied shoes and opened the door wide. He grabbed crackers and a yogurt and called it good enough. The school text arrived before I reached my desk. Missing main meal, the message read with efficient politeness. He forwarded it to me with a sad face emoji. I replied with a single word and a period, handled. Afternoon hit and the hamper stood like a dare. He shouted from the bedroom that socks had vanished. I kept my hands off the growing pile and waited. He left wearing mismatched ones and asked if anyone would notice. I filmed the sink as it filled across the day. He posted a story with a playful filter and captions. Domestic fail, he joked while framing himself as the plucky survivor. Comments pinged in with laughing faces he collected like medals. At pickup he arrived late and waved at the teacher's frown. Traffic, he joked while tucking a snack into tiny hands. I stood behind the line and watched the clock judge him. He glanced toward me for rescue and found only air. Dinner crept closer and the counters stayed crowded and sticky. He asked where the cutting board lived and then pretended to search. You promised rotation, I reminded while setting plates within reach. He sliced a finger on the foil and raised it triumphantly. It stings, he shook his hand over the trash and winced. I passed a bandage and pointed toward the vegetables waiting. He blew on his finger like a candle and stepped back. I can't chop with injuries, he announced to the room. The child asked for water and then spilled it wide. He stared at the puddle like it might absorb itself. I handed him a towel and nodded once slow. He dabbed the edges lightly and left the center spreading. I opened my laptop and calculated our week without lifting a sponge. He peered over my shoulder and asked about the streaming password. List lives on the fridge, I said and kept typing. He headed there and returned within seconds, hands empty. Neighbors invited us for a quick walk after dinner. He messaged back a confident yes without checking the kitchen. I turned one burner and set a timer where he could see it. I'm stepping out for a call, I added and left. I circled the block and breathed until the timer beeped. Through the window he scrolled while smoke drifted and thickened. He rushed to the sink and blasted water over hot metal. I watched steam billow and felt nothing but clarity. When I re-entered he spun with a performative cough and grin. Comedy of errors, he pointed at the mess like evidence. I turned off the burner and set the pan aside carefully. We need takeout, he declared with fake relief and open arms. Not tonight, I pulled eggs from the carton and cracked. Your turn, finish, I slid the spatula into his hand. He stood there and laughed once and tried to hand it back. I kept my fingers at my sides and counted down silently. He scraped at the pan and broke every yolk to shreds. Our kid stared and asked if breakfast could happen tomorrow instead. He looked at me as if I would translate that loss. I took a breath and poured cereal dry with a nod. After bedtime he paced the hallway with theatrical exhaustion. Everyone ate, he announced to an audience of none. I pulled out a notepad and wrote 4 lines slowly. Tasks, deadlines, no coaching, consequences, not a threat, a schedule. Harsh, he scoffed and checked his reflection in the microwave door. I slid the note to the center and tapped once. Tomorrow morning, start with the first two before 9. He folded the paper and tucked it under a magnet with ceremony. I set my phone to vibrate and lay awake listening. He opened cupboards and closed them as if efficiency was loud. I stared into the dark and felt something steady assemble. This wasn't a test anymore, it was data. At dawn I stayed in bed and watched the hallway shadow. He moved back and forth, then stow. Piped then moved again. The sink still overflowed and the washer still stared blankly. He brought me coffee with a sheepish flourish and no completed list. Be gentle, he murmured while placing the cup like an offering. I took a sip and found grounds between my teeth. He waited for praise that didn't come and shifted his weight. My silence drew a hard outline around the morning and him. The thermometer beeped twice and my kid shivered against my chest. Check the dose, I pressed the bottle into his palm. He rotated it slowly and his mouth opened without words. I don't want to guess and hurt him, hovered between us. Read the chart, I kept my voice level and tight. He blinked at the numbers like they might decode themselves. I measured with steady hands and counted out loud for proof. He exhaled in relief and stepped back from responsibility again. The fever climbed and the skin under my wrist burned. Call the nurse line now, I passed him the phone. He poked the screen and navigated to a weather app. Wrong icon, I whispered while my stomach turned, something's coming. He finally dialed and put it on speaker near me. The nurse asked clear questions and waited for specifics. He looked at me for each answer like a student. I answered and moved to cool the room while listening. Recheck in 20 minutes, the nurse instructed with calm precision. He nodded and set the phone down like it weighed plenty. I watched the clock and tracked breathing in quiet counts. He hovered in the doorway and fiddled with his smartwatch, useless. The second reading was higher and my pulse jumped. Urgent care now, I said and grabbed the bag. He patted every pocket and announced the keys had disappeared. I found them under yesterday's mail and didn't look back. In the car he asked if we needed gas today. Focus on directions, I kept one hand on our child. He tapped the map and turned the volume up. A wrong turn flashed and I gripped the wheel harder. We reached the lot and he hesitated at the entrance. Forms scare me, he joked with a thin laugh that cracked. I carried the kid inside and asked for intake quickly. He trailed behind and pretended to search for pens instead. The receptionist handed me a clipboard and a digital pad. I completed the screens and answered medical history in seconds. He stood to the side and took a selfie quietly. I stared until he tucked the phone away under my silence. A nurse appeared and asked who could describe symptoms precisely. He stepped forward, then looked to me for every detail. I listed times and reactions while holding our kid close. The nurse nodded and moved us to a small room fast. Guardian able to administer meds solo? The nurse asked gently. Yes, I replied and felt something settle like a verdict. He rubbed his neck and asked where trash bins were. The nurse pointed and checked vitals again with purposeful hands. Doctor entered and spoke directly to the bed's edge. Possible viral spike, you did the right thing so far. He glanced between us and asked about adherence and follow-up. I said yes and watched my partner stare at the floor. A discharge plan printed, and we got a measured timeline. He reached for the paper and frowned at the wording. Can you translate this doctor language? He whispered near my ear. I folded it and slid it into my pocket like evidence. Back home the kid finally dozed with sweat cooling slowly. I wrote the dosing times on a sticky note near water. He inspected the note and tapped the edge with approval. I'll set alarms, he announced like a favor not a duty. First alarm rang and he brought me the wrong dosage cup. Other one, I pointed and kept my eyes on the clock. He swapped tools and looked at me for confirmation again. I nodded once and watched his hands tremble near the line. When the child settled again, he stretched on the couch dramatically. I'm wrecked, drifted to the ceiling like a confession no one needed. I loaded the washer and changed sheets without commentary. He yawned and asked if I could cancel his morning meeting. Email them yourself, I moved past and grabbed clean pajamas. He reached for the laptop and forgot his password twice. Reset it, I said and tucked the blanket around small shoulders. He clicked through prompts and then turned the screen toward me. Security question, your first pet's name, he smirked without shame. I shook my head and went quiet until he looked away. He guessed 3 times and locked himself out with a sigh. The room hummed and I felt tomorrow's shape harden. At 2 a.m. the fever broke and breath evened. He snored once and jolted awake with confused pride. We did it, he declared while stretching like a champion on stage. I stared at the monitor and felt nothing except resolve. Dawn bled into the edges of the blinds and buzzed. He shuffled into the kitchen and opened the fridge blankly. Coffee, he lifted the pot like an offer. Into a monarch. I need 1 hour to sleep, I said and walked past him. When I woke, he held a bowl like a trophy. Cereal for him, I kept it simple, he beamed at the effort. I checked the clock and saw we were already late. He scratched his head and suggested we text the teacher excuses. Pack his bag, I handed him the checklist without coaching. He scanned the lines and grabbed 2 items then paused. Where are the wipes? Floated toward the hallway like a balloon. I stared and kept my voice even, the locations never changed. On the drive he asked if we could skip daycare today. Work needs me, he added with a shrug toward his phone. I tightened my grip and felt the question land hard. Work needs me too, I answered and turned onto the main road. Drop-off took longer because he forgot the health slip. I found a spare and filled it against the wall fast. He apologized to the teacher like a comedian who bombed. Our kid hugged my leg and then reached toward him anyway. Back home he flopped on the couch with theatrical pain. I'll start laundry after a quick break, floated toward the ceiling. I opened my laptop and reviewed the budget quietly. A red notification pulsed and my chest went cold. Another late fee had posted on his card overnight. I checked the statement and saw a streaming charge doubled. He peered over and whistled like a bystander at a parade. I'm awful with numbers, he joked and searched for a snack. I'm done cushioning, I said with my eyes on the screen. Meaning what? He asked while stiffness edged into his tone. You carry your share starting today, no rescue, I answered. He laughed once and then noticed I didn't laugh back. Unfair, he muttered and stabbed at the remote with irritation. I stood and drew a short line down the center island. Your zones, your deadlines, proof by end of day, I told him. He stared at the line like it might move on its own. My phone rang with a follow-up from urgent care. They asked about fever logs and pain management since discharge. I reported the numbers and times with crisp detail. He hovered behind me and nodded as if he had done it. By noon he completed nothing except a heroic grocery post. He filmed himself choosing apples with a dramatic look of confusion. Comments flooded in cheering for effort over outcome again. I scrolled through and tasted the edge of a new plan. I typed a message to his sister with 3 clear sentences. He's safe, kids stable, I need support today. She replied that she could swing by after her shift. I stared at that text and felt the ground tilt toward action. When he returned, he dropped bags and announced a budgeting epiphany. Cash only from now on, he declared like a coach at halftime. I opened the wallet and counted what he had overdrawn. His face shifted and the performance dimmed around the edges. Therapy appointment at 5, I said and slid him a card. He smirked and asked who needed that more in this house. Both, I answered while dialing to confirm attendance. He rolled his eyes and then glanced at the door nervously. An hour later the daycare called about a mild headache. He froze and stared at me as if the phone burned. I'll go, I grabbed keys and held out my hand. Come with us, I added and waited in the doorway. In the car he practiced sincerity like lines for a show. I want to improve, I just freeze at tasks, he offered. That freeze lands on me and our kid, I replied evenly. He fell quiet and the engine filled the space between us. Pickup was quick and our child curled into my side. He walked ahead and held the door for us without words. At home he placed water by the bed with care. It was small and late and yet it registered. 5 o'clock came and he stared at his shoes. Go, I said and handed him the paper with time. He nodded and left with a new steadiness I tracked. I sat on the floor and breathed like I had choices. When he returned he looked smaller and oddly focused. Homework from the therapist, he offered with a skinny smile. Skill practice 1 task at a time, proof daily. I listened and waited for the dodge that always followed. He didn't dodge, he took the broom and actually swept. Not perfect and not quick, yet he stayed with it. I felt the slightest shift in my ribs like a hinge. Then he checked his phone and the spell almost snapped. Keep going, I said and set a 15-minute timer. He glanced at the countdown and kept pushing crumbs together. The kid watched from the doorway and clapped once. A tiny cheer, a tiny step, still not trust. After bedtime, he brought the notebook from therapy with fresh lines. Daily log, shared responsibility. If I miss, I make up. His eyes darted up then down as if bracing for impact. I kept my face neutral and added my own columns. We divided chores into blocks and assigned time windows. He swallowed and agreed to mornings and every other night. I drew a box around cry. Tickle tasks and dotted consequences. He traced the box with a finger like a brand. Before sleep he reached for my hand and paused midair. Can I fix this? He asked with a voice I rarely heard. You can start, I answered and let the weight hang. He nodded and whispered good night like it might matter tomorrow. I turned off the light and stared through the dark space. My brain replayed the clinic, the fees, the line on the counter. A picture formed of me walking out with a calm spine. Not tonight, but soon if the log stayed empty. The alarm blared and he slapped snooze while my timer ran. Log your tasks before 7, I placed the notebook on his chest. He blinked at the pages and reached for his phone instead. I stood there until his screen lit my face like a verdict. Breakfast rotation today, I pointed to the chart with clean boxes. He swung his legs over the bed and shuffled toward the kitchen. The fridge door opened and stayed open while he stalled. I'll optimize this later, he muttered as minutes evaporated. I watched. Our kid patted in and asked for toast with jam. He held the knife wrong and then pretended to search drawers. Help me just this once, he tried with a practiced grin. I stepped back and counted to 5 as the clock advanced. By 7:30 the log remained blank and the plate untouched. He waved a spoon like a flag and claimed performance anxiety. I buttered bread fast and slid it to small hands. He exhaled with relief he had not earned, and I noted it. School drop-off is yours, I handed over the backpack slowly. He patted the pockets and proclaimed keys missing with dramatic concern. I pointed at the hook where they hung every morning. He laughed too loud and tried to hug me on his way out. 40 minutes later the teacher texted me about a forgotten form. I answered from my desk and added it to the list. A second message landed that they were late again. I stared at the screen until my reflection steadied into resolve. The door opened and he tossed the backpack near the couch. Traffic was brutal, he offered while stretching like a tired athlete. I picked up the planner and flipped to today's page. Proof, I said and tapped the column labeled deliverables. Silence grew. He wrote 2 bullet points with vague verbs and no times. Start with the sync and payment portal, I kept my voice calm. He nodded slowly and scrolled through notifications with wandering thumbs. I sat beside him and tracked minutes like weights tied to us. Water ran, then nothing, then a sigh loud enough for neighbors. Pipe makes weird sounds, he announced while drying a single cup. I opened the cabinet and found piles unchanged since Sunday. He shrugged at the mess, then asked about lunch options. I didn't answer. Noon arrived and he lifted the notebook like a shield. Therapist homework says celebrate small wins, he declared with bright eyes. Wins require completion, I replied and pushed the laptop across. He logged in and stalled at the first authentication step. Forgot code again, his smile begged for rescue. I no longer offered. Use recovery email, I pointed and folded my hands together. He typed slowly and then held the screen toward me. Can you read the CAPTCHA? He asked while rubbing his temple. I read it and watched him mistype it twice. He laughed thinly and switched tabs to a highlights video. I closed the window and set a 15-minute timer. Finish bill pay before this ends, I said and leaned back. The timer beeped and the notice still blinked unpaid. He winced, then launched a monologue about cognitive overload. I stood and gathered the therapy notebook and my planner. Move aside, I said and knocked out the payment in 30 seconds. He paced and then wrapped his arms around himself with mock shivers. You're so efficient it makes me freeze, came with watery sincerity. Then learn while watching, I answered and left the chair open. He sat, clicked once and opened a shopping tab. My throat tightened. 3 o'clock brought a call from his sister at last. "I can take the kid Friday," she offered with solid energy. I wrote it down and looked up at him expectantly. He nodded as if arranging help counted as effort. It didn't. 4 rolled in, and he remembered therapy logs were due nightly. He scribbled lines about intentions and feelings without concrete actions. "That's reflection," I said and drew an empty square beside them. "Evidence goes here," I added while his shoulders sagged like wet cloth. The doorbell rang, and a courier handed me a parcel. He perked up like a dog at the word package. Inside lay the planner I ordered for shared schedules. I set it on the table and slid over a pen. "We plot a week now," I said and opened to Monday. He spun the pen between fingers and stalled at the margin. "Can we start next month?" he asked with a pleading smile. I closed the book and felt my decision lock into place. I pulled a SM. I'll duffel from the hall without noise. He watched the zipper and finally went still at last. "We're staying with your sister tonight," I said with even tone. His mouth moved twice before any sound arrived, a thin "why?" "Because the log is theater and the house is sinking." My voice surprised me with its quiet power and final edge. He reached for jokes and found none within reach. I packed pajamas and the health folder while my heart stayed steady. "Please give me this weekend," he whispered with hands half lifted. "You can have it," I answered and kept folding small shirts. "But it won't include me if the ledger stays empty." He flinched like the word ledger had teeth, which it did. Our kid wandered in and asked if this was a trip. "Yes, a sleepover," I said and knelt to tie tiny laces. He crouched beside us and tickled a laugh from sheer habit. The laugh cracked midway and the room held its breath. At the door he blocked the frame and tried a smile. "I'll figure it out by morning," he promised with forced cheer. "Send proof by 9, I replied and stepped past his shoulder. He lowered his hand and let the door close like surrender. The drive was quiet except for a small humming song. I watched the road and counted tasks he had never learned. At a red light my eyes burned but I didn't blink. Freedom tastes like nothing at first, then it becomes air. His sister opened her place with a tight nod and open arms. "We have space," she said and took the bag from me. I tucked the kid into the spare bed with gentle hands. She looked at my face and didn't ask questions yet. When the house settled, she poured water and waited me out. "I'm not here for a fight," I said and touched the table. "I'm here for a deadline he can't slide past." She exhaled and nodded once like a gavel I needed. My phone buzzed at 8 with a photo of the sink. Empty and gleaming like a showroom with carefully staged angles. "Was this you or a filter?" I texted without emojis. He replied with a thumbs up and no timestamps. My jaw clenched. 8:15 brought a second image of a folded mountain. Same blanket repeated across the pile like a magic trick. "Live video," I requested and started a call with sound on. He declined and messaged that the connection at home was terrible. At 8:40 he sent a screen of the budget app. Totals circled in red with numbers that made no sense. "Open the spreadsheet and share screen now," I wrote firmly. He didn't respond and the tiny dots blinked like static. 9 arrived and my phone stayed dark for a full minute. I looked at the kid sleeping and felt my spine grow. His sister tilted her head as if hearing my decision form. I opened a new message and typed it one sentence at a time. "Tomorrow we meet a mediator by noon," I wrote with calm precision. "You can join and show change or you can stay home." "I'm not waiting for another performance clip," I added and stopped. I pressed send and placed the phone face down, heartbeat loud. It buzzed and buzzed until the kitchen felt like a hive. He sent apologies and gifts and a photo of a calendar. He asked for another week to become someone new. I stared at the water glass and didn't reach for it. I called the mediator and left a clear voicemail. 2 appointments were available and I took the earliest slot. His sister squeezed my shoulder and whispered that she'd watch the kid. My chest lifted once like an elevator that finally moved. Near midnight he texted that he was outside with flowers. I looked through the peephole and saw him pacing in circles. I didn't open because grand gestures never cleaned a ledger. The lock stayed quiet and my message stayed unread on purpose. Morning arrived with a blue badge from the mediator's office. Confirmation, time, address, a checklist of documents needed. I gathered insurance cards and the shared account list briefly. My hands didn't shake and that surprised me in a good way. He arrived at 9 sharp with coffee and a brittle smile. I did the sink and the sheets and the budget, he offered. Bring receipts, I answered and held out my palm flat. He handed nothing and looked at his shoes like they lied. At 11 I packed the duffel again and tied my hair. He watched every motion as if folding were a closing argument. Can we try one more month, he asked with a breaking voice. We can try one honest day, I said and took the keys. We reached the mediator and sat on opposite sides quietly. She read our forms and asked if safety was in question. No, only trust, I answered while he tapped the table twice. She nodded and slid us a sheet titled Interim Boundaries. I breathed. Shared custody schedule, split bills with auto-pay evidence required. Missed obligations convert to make-up hours within 24 hours. Failure to comply triggers a temporary separation plan. He swallowed hard and then signed his name with a shaking hand. Leaving the office I felt lighter and heavier at once. He walked beside me and kept glancing to measure my temperature. I want to meet the bar, he whispered at the curb. Then meet it without me carrying you, I said and opened the door. Back at his sister's place, our kid ran into his arms. He lifted and spun once, then set him down gently. He met my eyes over a small head and didn't wink. For the first time, he didn't ask for praise, I noticed. That night I slept 8 hours in a straight line. My phone stayed quiet because the schedule handled the noise. In the morning, a shared document pinged with 3 completed tasks. Actual timestamps, before dawn, no flare. I kept my face still. He arrived at pickup with the health slip already signed. I checked the duffel and found everything the list required. He didn't crack a joke or aim a camera anywhere. He asked what was next and waited for an actual answer. Next is consistency, I said while buckling our kid's seat. 10 days of logs without gaps, then we talk. He nodded once and closed the door without reaching for me. Outside the window he mouthed see you tomorrow, then walked. I drove away and felt the silence change its shape. It wasn't the old silence filled with weight and dread. It was the space where I protect my time and child. If he builds inside it, I'll see it, if not, I'll go.